Welcome to Inform Accessible Housing. I'll tell you a little bit about what's going to happen first and introduce everybody, and then we're good to go. So we have with us today, first of all, I'm Kath, I'm the UpLift project lead. We've also got Adam, Pathfinders Social Media and Outreach Assistant. He's going to be doing the tech for us. And we're really excited to have our speakers, Sarah Rose, who is Pathfinders co-chair of trustees, and Fleur Perry, who's a volunteer campaigner amongst all sorts of other things. Is that right, Fleur?
That's right, yeah. Hi.
So we're going to have a presentation from Sarah and Fleur shortly. If you have questions, you can use the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, or I'm hoping that I've enabled the chat function, so you can send us a message in the chat. There will be time at the end of the presentation, though, for a Q&A, so do save up your questions, then we want some good questions to answer. And Fleur and Sarah have a wealth of knowledge, so yeah, get them in now. It's the benefit of coming along to the live event. So I think that's everything covered. Oh, sorry, at the very end of the session, there will be a quick poll that we'd ask you to fill out to evaluate the session, which is something that we need to do for our funding, our Pathfinders National Lottery. And so I think now I'm going to hand over to Fleur and Sarah.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Okay, so yeah, we're talking about accessible housing and our experiences. Could we have the next slide, please, Adam? Okay, well, we've already been introduced, so Fleur and myself. We're going to be having, it's sort of going to be like a conversation style. And if we could have the next next slide, please. And we'll just go through what we're covering. So we're going to start with our own housing experiences. Briefly talk about the different housing options and some top tips. Then Fleur will be covering rights and responsibilities. I'm going to be talking about disabled facilities grants, and then there'll be our reflections and time for questions at the end. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So there are different ways to approach housing, different options, and these depend on your personal preference and your circumstances. So you may apply to your local council, local authority, apply for a housing association, property. You might think about private renting, and there's also the option to buy or obtain a mortgage. Next slide, please. Okay, so between us, me and Fleur have come up with some tips, which we're going to go through, and we'll just sort of have a general chat about these. So if I kick off with contacting your local housing team, and that's actually how I started. I've just realised we haven't talked about our own experiences, but I'll come on to that next. So I started by contacting my local team, getting on the housing register, telling them all about me and my needs, and establishing which bracket I was going to be put on, so that they were aware of my situation. Fleur, over to you.
Yep, so I'd also speak to adult social care or continuing healthcare, or both in your area. So usually they will go ask the housing team, but they may be aware of things that have been happening within the council, companies that have come to them going, we're developing properties, but we don't know if there's a need for it. Just ask them what's around, what they have, what they don't have, and just make them aware as well if there's a need that's not being met, they will be able to feed that further up into the council, up to the councillors, across to the planning team, across to the housing team, and say, look, we've got people whose care needs are maybe being impacted by the lack of accessible housing, and having that evidence, even if they can't give you an option straight away, will help things change.
I definitely agree. And in my case, it was good to have them on my side, because moving out from my family home into my own place, I needed to increase my care hours. So there was a lot of joint sort of working between social worker, care team, and the housing association, and yeah, it all needed to be joined up. Okay, so if renting is something that you would be interested in, private renting, it would be proactive to introduce yourself to your local estate agents, make them aware of what you're looking for. Remember you, Flo, saying about having a list. It was important to have a written down list of all your must-haves or essentials or preferences, so that every time you spoke to somebody, you had it there in front of you. So it just helps you to be organised.
Absolutely. So at the bottom, we've got make lists of your housing needs. So, you know, do you need a wet room, or do you need space to install a wet room? Perhaps do you need doorways of certain width? And things that are obvious to us but might not be obvious to an estate agent, a housing officer, or even some OTs. You know, just write down every single thing, like the size of your bed and the room that you need either side it to get your wheelchair around, to give your PAs space to work, to be able to put furniture in the room as well. Level access is something that estate agents might not know about, or housing officers might suggest a property that doesn't have. You know, write out, I need this, this, and this. It's my absolute basics. And then I can install this, this, and this in order to meet my needs. And then when you go, or someone goes on your behalf to view a property, you can tick off the list. Yes, it's got enough parking for my PAs. No, there isn't level access. Yes, there's room to install a ramp to resolve that. And that will just save so much time if everyone's got that ahead of time.
This is really good advice. And I think it takes a bit of the stress out of things if you've got something written down on paper, ready to go. The other useful thing to do, and this is something that I did, was engage with the developers and local planners. If there is a lack of accessible housing in your area, there's nothing to stop you reaching out to those that are developing or potentially planning for new builds. That's what I did, and I'll talk about that more in a little while. But that meeting I had, it was a local village meeting about the new plan for housing, and I spoke to some really key people that day, and I'm sure it helped.
And then whatever happens, just keep on looking. The properties might not be there when you want them or need them. Chances are they probably won't be on the first day that you look. You're not going to find your dream house, but it will not be there if you do not look. Set aside a dedicated time each week where you're looking at estate agents' websites, or going on the council bidding scheme, or talking to whichever teams you're talking to. Just keep on going. So it actually took me 2.5 years to find my little bungalow, and then another few months to get it adapted to what I needed. But I looked every single week, and if I had not done that, I could have missed it. It could have been a lot longer.
Now, I apologise for deviating earlier, but we're now going to talk about our own experiences, just to summarise them briefly. If I'll start with my housing situation. So I've lived in an accessible bungalow now for 18 years. Before that, I was living with my family, and my needs were increasing, and also my need for my own space and to be able to make my own decisions and just sort of not rely on my family so much. So as I said earlier, I got myself on the local housing list, made myself known to them. I was on it for I think 2.5 years before I was offered a housing association property, which I do think was perhaps because I went along to the meeting of the local planners and told them about my situation and also about the lack of accessible housing in my local area. So I was offered a bungalow which hadn't been built at that time. So I was fortunate to be able to be consulted with the planning of it. So I got to see the architect's drawings and say where I needed things positioning so that it would be workable for me. And it was always meant to be an accessible bungalow. So it's been designed very well in terms of space, turning space, layout. But the idea is that I think there's also a sister bungalow in another nearby town, but that it would be within regulations for anybody that needed wheelchair access. And like I said, I've been here 18 years. It took a long time to get used to living on my own with my care team. I have a 24-hour care team. But it was probably the best step I've made so far. And but as I've changed, I've needed more adaptations, which the house is designed to evolve with me, and they had the foresight to reinforce the ceilings from when it was built, so that if I ever did need a ceiling track hoist, then the house would be ready for that installation. Wouldn't need too much sort of upheaval, which is exactly what did happen. And I shall be talking you through that process a bit later. But I think you've had enough from me for a bit, and I'll hand over to Fleur so she could explain to you a bit about her housing situation.
Sure. So I sort of got to my early to mid-20s, and as many young people do, decided that I wanted to live in my own home, give my parents a bit of breathing space and just a break from having to deal with my care needs all of the time. And so I had no idea where to start at all. I started asking around and did not get very far for quite a long time. It was only when I asked another disabled person that I found out how to log on to the local housing register to get a council or housing association property. I'd been, trying to save, looking for a job, but there weren't many accessible jobs in my area. There weren't the working from home options that there are now. And with the benefit caps, it was not possible to get a mortgage at that time. So I did qualify for the list, and I waited, and I looked, and I waited, and I looked, and I waited, and I looked. This went on every week for some time. Eventually I got a bit bored, as you might. So I began reading all of the council's policies on allocations, on planning, on, you know, the news around what was going on with housing, new policy changes, and the numbers did not add up. I looked at the maths behind the policies and the statistics they had, and it did not add up. So I actually ended up storming into the council offices with my red folder of doom full of statistics, and said that this is not good enough. And I showed them the figures. I talked to them a little bit about the Equality Act, which we'll come on to later. I did not know then what I know now, but I made myself loud enough that they would take it seriously. Eventually, I got to the top of the list and found a bungalow, but I did not stop speaking to them at that point, because it's not an issue that affects one person. It's an issue that affects everyone in the area. And it took a few months to get it adapted and to get the care package in place. I'd already done the paperwork ahead of time, got it signed off that when I moved, I would have 24-hour care, but actually making that happen took a little bit of time. So talk to other people who've done it, gather some experiences, and make your own plan with backup plans as well. But we got the hoists in, we got the right size equipment in, and it works. It is so good, especially as I'd previously had stairs. So a bungalow to me is just amazing. Go for it.
I could only echo what you've just said, Fleur. And also the bit you said about giving your parents sort of their space back and be able to do their thing. And I knew that my sister would be moving out, and I guess I wanted to do it before she did. As is, you know, being older than she is, it just seemed to be, you know, I wanted to follow that sort of natural progression. I was 27 when I moved out, but I think it was the right time for me, and it was the best thing to do. And as Fleur demonstrated in what she just said, she's very good at asking the difficult questions. She wasn't afraid to go into the local authority and to challenge them on things, and that leads me nicely into what I hope is the next slide. Okay, Fleur, over to you for your spot.
Yes, so this is about what I had in that red folder and what I wish I had in that red folder at that time. So council allocation policies, they differ between every single council, and some of them may not be as they should be. And if there's something that's blocking you in that document, if there's something blocking you for accessible housing, for example, an age limit or an area requirement that you have to have lived there for a certain amount of time without living away for a certain length of time, ask if they can do a reasonable adjustment to that, explain why you need that. And if they're not open to that conversation in any way at all, you may need legal advice depending on what the situation is. But don't just go, oh, the policy says no. Go and talk to them about why they have that policy. Can they change it? Is it open to exceptions? Is it time to update it completely? Go and say that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I certainly feel that helped my case where when I went to the planning meeting that day and spoke to somebody and explained the challenges I was having and how long I'd been waiting. Yeah, it's definitely worth doing.
I've just seen a message flash up. I can't open it on Zoom, unfortunately, but I saw that someone is having a frustration with an age limit. Go and talk to them. If they won't talk to you, go and talk to a lawyer. Check that they're doing that in a way that's consistent with the law. Ask them if they will make a reasonable adjustment for your situation. Go and have that conversation.
Fleur, he's also asked or mentioned that he found the private rental market to be impossible to find anywhere suitable. Are you going to cover that at some point in the presentation as well? Or would you like to address that now?
I can address that now. So landlords are not allowed to discriminate and say no to disabled people. They're not allowed to refuse DFGs either. So if somebody needs an adaptation, which Sarah will tell you more about later, landlords legally cannot say no without a decent reason. So if the properties aren't accessible, that might not be a barrier if they're adaptable.
Okay, should we move on to the next slide, please? Ah,
Okay, so I did a little bit of talking with a lawyer back in 2019 about the responsibilities of planning departments. What they're supposed to do is look at the people in their area, make a prediction for maybe 15 or 20 years ahead, and decide how best to build new housing, what to tell the developers to build. Part of that is how much accessible housing do we need? And they really do have to look at that question. They are required to think about what disabled people need as part of their planning process. Some of them haven't done this. There is plenty of data out there around how many councils aren't doing this, how much accessible housing isn't going to be built. So if you're not finding an accessible property, maybe not enough are being built. And I would definitely go and check your local planning website on the council webpage. Go and see what their plan is. Usually the local plans are very long. Just do Control F wheelchair or Control F accessible or Control F adaptable and check. If they haven't mentioned anything at all, that's a problem. And in the document, which has the link there, there is a list of questions that you can ask, a template letter to say to the council that's not good enough, and the legal reasons why they have to take it seriously, because the Equality Act requires them to make reasonable adjustments to policy. The Equality Act requires them under something called the Public Sector Equality Duty to take due regard to the need of disabled people. If they have written nothing at all, it's going to be very hard for them to show due regard. And these are situations that could end up in court if you choose to take them there. So I would definitely look at the local plan, talk to a lawyer, read this document, and see where you go.
I believe this link will be sent out after the webinar. So if any of you want to have a look at that further, it's a brilliant piece that Fleur's produced. You will have the link sent to you afterwards. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? I
So
think
yeah,
this-
this
yeah.
is a better summary of what I just said. So shortage of accessible housing near you could be a sign that your council's local plan doesn't tell developers to build enough. Councils are supposed to figure out how much accessible housing the population needs and give due regard. Those two words are the most important because they are present in the legislation, which is very exciting. But only disabled people can challenge these policies. Nobody else can go in and say, that's not good enough, we're taking you to court. The only people with the power to do that are disabled people living in that area. So if you're not finding the housing that you need, and they're not doing right by you by making sure that accessible housing is being built, the only person that can take that council to court over that breach of law is you or somebody living in your area in a similar situation. So please don't ignore it.
It's really good idea to sort of arm yourself with all this information. Do your research and talk to other people as well, especially people living in your area in similar situations. And maybe get something that could be a group action, perhaps. But, okay, thank you, Fleur. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly. I try not to ramble on too much about my disabled facilities grants. And Fleur is going to sort of do a mini interview, ask me some questions, just to help me remember everything.
Yes, I am. So how did the process get started, Sarah?
Okay, well, it started from a need in that we were finding that manual transfers were proving risky for both myself and for my PAs. And we had some involvement with my care package managers, the CCG, CHC team. So I was referred to an OT. So the community OT came out to visit me, and she talked for, I'd say, about 2 hours the first visit, just to get a clear picture of me and my situation. And it was quite a relief at the end of that I felt like she got the situation. She got me, she asked the right questions, and she understood my needs in terms of moving around. And the main issue turned out to be how I would get from my bedroom to the bathroom, how I could access the toilet, because what we were doing currently just was too much of a risk. So that's how it all began.
Who else was involved after that?
And so there's quite a few people. So the OT then sought advice from a local mobility advisor. And so he came out and started the ball rolling in terms of looking at products. There were lots of things to get right first before we even started thinking about applying for disabled facilities grants. Things like which sling, was it safe? Was it right for me? So I had visits from sling reps. I think I even did a Zoom with one. So we had to work out all of the details first to show that it was going to be a viable option. because until then I wasn't hoisted onto the toilet. It was just a manual transfer. So then we had to look at the bedroom, the layout. We then had visits from hoist installation companies. Contact was also made with my district council. I was introduced to the DFG officer. The housing association had to be kept in the loop as well. And so once we were able to get plans and quotes, because I think they usually ask for at least 2 quotes so that they can ensure things are active. Once all those things were in place, then the application process could begin. I think I've included everybody.
Brilliant. And did the DFG fully fund the hoist?
It was jointly funded, I think, because of the fact it was housing association property, and so it was their property, strictly speaking. They partly funded it, so it was jointly funded by district council and the housing association, and they had quite strict rules or stipulations on what was to happen afterwards. So lots of boxes had to be ticked, as usual.
Lots of red tape. So how long did this process take between identifying, I think I need a hoist, and actually having it there ready to use?
This is a good question. The other day I had a look back at all of the emails I had over the time, and I think it was maybe 18 months from start to finish. Like I said, a lot had to be ironed out to start with. Then it was the getting the quotes that I had to chase things up. Over Christmas, everything ground to a halt, and I think perhaps one of the companies wasn't too keen on doing it, so they just dragged their feet. But you had to have 2 quotes in order for the application to go through. I've just seen a question pop up, and yes, they are they do a financial assessment as part of the application. So I would say yes, they are means tested. They depending on your savings and your situation. Yes, 18 months with a few hold-ups, but we got there in the end. And I shall show you some photos in a minute.
So was it all smooth after that, or did other things need to happen?
There was a bit of discussion and toing and froing about how it would be maintained afterwards. In the end, the housing association insisted that they would take responsibility for it because it was in their property. So every 6 months, they send out somebody from a contractor to come and service it, check it, and then I'd say the following week, they then send somebody out from the insurance company to inspect it. So they're quite tight on it. But that's great for me. It means that, it's very unlikely to go wrong. And they've already replaced a few things that have shown minimal signs of wear and tear. But I think that's a good thing. It means that they're vigilant and it will keep it working for me as long as I need it to.
Fantastic. Are there any differences in how disabled facilities grants work in different areas of the UK?
Yes, I believe there are. I think England, Wales, and Northern Ireland are similar. then the local authority will provide grants for adaptations, for ease of access, for improving the living room areas or whichever room you need to for different reasons. They do have different thresholds. And I've got some facts later on. I think the maximum grant in England is 30,000, and that varies. I think Wales might be less, Northern Ireland might be more, and Scotland do things a bit differently. But I do have some resources that will be useful, which you'll see later on. Can we have the next slide, please, Adam? So, in the middle of all this process, we considered options, and I thought it might just be of interest to show you what they were considering. So we had this decision to make as well. So I was consulted, and also the OT had input. So the first idea was the yellow rectangle is my bed, and the first idea was that it would come out into the roof and then do a very complicated bending system through into my bathroom and go over the toilet. Can we have the next slide, please? The next option was an H-frame, I believe they're called, and this was by far my preferred option, and also it was agreed that it was the best for my situation, and this meant that I could be hoisted from my bed into anywhere in my room because of the vertical bar that travels from left to right back again. So I could go from my bed into my wheelchair or anywhere basically that I wanted to be. And in terms of space, that was the ideal. Things weren't fixed. And then it would, if you imagine it moving to the right, and then it locks it to the piece that goes through to the bathroom, which is the bottom room, and then it goes over the toilet. So that is, you can see the notes at the bottom. It says current client wishes to keep bed in current position. A 90-degree bed would not leave enough space for the chair alongside the bed. And the client has stated this would not work for her. That was a different option. So I was given two. This was the one that we decided to go with. And yeah, it's worked like a dream.
It really looks fantastic. Having used Straight Track and H Track, I find H Track so much easier because if your wheelchair is parked a few centimeters out of the best position for Straight Track, it needs to be moved. If it's parked anywhere in the room on H Track, it's perfect.
Yeah, okay. I would recommend this system. Okay, next slide, please. So it did involve some alterations to my room. So as you can see, that's the threshold into the bathroom, and I had to take my doors off, get rid of the piece that was above the door, and make doors that went from ceiling to floor for obvious reasons, because there needed to be the track going through. So that involved, I think it took about 7 days with a weekend in the middle for the whole thing. I'd worked with here all day. And you can see on the right hand picture, there's the wonderful hoist in place. And you can, if you imagine again, as I said before, that bar that's going across the picture moves across my room. So there's pieces either end that that creates the H shape. And I can operate it myself so that my PAs can do all the maneuvering bits, check for wires and ventilators and all that sort of thing. But they could also operate it themselves if I was ever unable to do that. So yeah, for me it was time to do that, and I'm so glad that the house was built with that reinforced ceiling in the first place. Otherwise, that would have had to have been part of the whole process as well. And it's made a huge difference to both me and probably more so my PAs, because things have changed. Okay, next slide, please. Now, Fleur helped me with this list. I'm gonna think it's really good advice here. So double check plans and measurements because they do make mistakes. And in fact, that did happen at some point where something was just a little bit out, but a little bit can make a big difference. So
Absolutely.
don't be afraid to check that sort of thing.
I remember getting a DFG started for a ramp, and I got the plans through, measured my wheelchair again. It had already been measured, but I measured it again and realised that even with the tilt function with my footplate at the lowest, meaning my chair was at its shortest, there would be no turning space at the flat bit of the ramp where I was supposed to turn. The circle of the chair did not fit into the square of the platform of the ramp. So I did a quick drawing, Microsoft Paint, and sent it to them and said, look, it's not going to work. And only you know your equipment the best. So measure everything. Think about the spaces that you need, that your PAs need when you're doing transfers or moving around, and double check everything because only you know what's actually going to work.
I think as we mentioned before about talking to people, asking your peers about their experiences. Do you know somebody that's got or ceiling track hoist or whatever equipment or adaptation that you're looking for? That don't underestimate the usefulness of doing that. And you can find out things to look out for. Be honest with your OT about your needs. Try things out if possible. Not always. You're not always able to do that, but it's good to see things, working examples. Pull people back to fix things and do it as soon as possible. I had an issue in the first few days where a light kept coming on and I didn't realise why. It kept going to orange and it should have been green. And I just thought that's what it did. Then I found out because it sort of started going slow, that it was actually not charging properly. And the reason for that was that when it went through into the other room, they hadn't cut out a piece of the door frame to allow for the wire that stuck out of the top of the hoist. So every time it went through to the microwave, it knocked the wire out. So they had to come back, take a piece out of the frame, and also there were a few little other snags that the building firm had to put right. Well, yeah, don't be afraid to do that. Just because it's there and you're pleased with it, and don't be afraid to ask them to put things right if it's not quite right for you. And don't be afraid to chase things up, which I had to after that Christmas break because suddenly the whole application process slowed down and I was sat sort of in limbo while they were waiting for companies to provide their quotes. So I just had to give the housing officer at my district council a bit of a nudge to chase them up. So sort of, yeah, took tips there. Could we have the next slide, please? I just got a few facts. I won't talk for much longer on this, but as I said, the 30,000 is the maximum in England, and the amount that you get depends on your income and savings. As Fleur mentioned before, a local authority cannot refuse to allow you to make a formal application or refuse to give you an application form. And of course, you should not have any work carried out on a property until the application has been approved. Next slide, please. And if anybody wants more information, and again, these will be included in the email after the webinar. There's the gov.uk webpage, which summarises the process, and also I think very useful and includes all the different areas is the Disability Rights UK webpage on housing grants. That's not just DFGs, that there's a whole list of other things that you can look at. But I recommend, if you're interested, to take a look at that site. As we just can't include everything today. But yeah, take a look. Next slide, please. So I thought we'll just have 2 minutes of wrapping up before we move on to questions. But I think the 3 things that I hope you take from what we've been talking about today is the importance of making lists of what you need, asking the difficult questions, as Fleur is so brilliant at, and talking to others about their experiences. Fleur, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Those are the main points that I've got, but I would also say a general tip for any dealings with any area of life that someone will say no is ask them why they're saying no. Don't just take the no and run away. Say to them, why is your policy like this? Why are you refusing me this? Why is it a no? So just that one question will get you a really long way.
Definitely. Okay, thank you. Could we have the last slide, please, Ada? And then we shall open out for questions.
Shall I read them out?
That would be
Thank you.
great.
So we've got somebody asking, they're on the current lowest band for my local council, as I currently live in an adapted property with my family. I'm on the lowest banding for my local housing as I live in an adapted property with my family. Apparently the only way of moving up the list is getting my family to agree that I need my independence.
Okay.
This is never going to happen, so should I go private, renting or buying?
Well, there is another option to look at, depending on how big a property is and how many adults are in that property. It can count as statutory overcrowding, which might move you further up the list. Also, that property is adapted, but is it perfect for your needs, or is living with your family having a health impact? Those things can also move you up the list. It may be adapted, but is it correctly adapted? What is happening with your health in that situation that you're in right now? and talk to your family about why you want to live independently, why you want to move. Just talk through it, maybe with a social worker or someone who arranges your care, and just they should not be able to block you from making your decision. And you can look at renting, you can look at mortgages as well. Landlords are not allowed to refuse people on benefits. Mortgage companies, I don't know so much about how they make decisions, but go and talk to every single one of them about what they would need from you to offer your mortgage. Go and have that conversation.
Thanks, Fleur. And the next one's very similar, about can you access the housing list if in a parental home, given you are deemed living in a suitably adapted property for your needs?
Yep, so again, statutory overcrowding would be the two words to talk about and look at in the allocations policy. Have a closer look at the allocations policy to see if there's anything else that you can say to them that they will tick a box for, and record any impacts on your health or anything that's happening at home that is not ideal as well, and make your case. Don't hold back at all.
I think in my case, when I went on the housing list, overcrowding was a factor because my grandparents were living with us at the time. But also the fact that I had a care package when I was living at home. So my PAs were coming into the family home, and there was the impact on their privacy, and it was just sort of all helped to create that picture of why I needed to find somebody somewhere, independently. So getting information like that, and also the space that you might need for extra equipment. Yeah, just whatever you can think of would be worth noting down.
And also planning for your future needs. Yes, that property may be suitable for you now, but think about the future. Are you going to need more equipment? Are you going to need different equipment? Is that in the near future or the far future? If it's in the near future, sort of within 5 years or so, actually the time to be planning to meet that housing need is now. It might be difficult to convince councils of that, but I would still get it on the record.
Thank you. Well, somebody else has said that their bungalow is tiny. How reasonable is it to ask my housing association to extend in the future when I need more space in the bathroom, kitchen, and an extra bedroom?
It depends on the amount of space around the property. So there are rules around how close to other buildings you can extend the edge of a dwelling. I would go to the planning team and ask what those rules are, particularly in your area. There may be additional requirements for planning extensions. So definitely go and open that conversation with them. And if that property is not meeting your needs, they may recommend looking for another property. They may say that they don't have the funding to do that because of the limit on the DFG. But I would say ask them, get what their policies are, look on their website, talk to other housing association residents, because every single one will have a different approach.
So something slightly similar. So should you be able to go on the housing list if in an adapted university accommodation and you have a date for the end of your studies in a couple of years' time?
they may not let you on that list immediately because you're not available to live in the property. So if you want to get on that list and look on the list next week, see a property, click the property, that's going to be vacant for a couple of years. They're not going to let you do that. But what they should do is, again, start having that conversation about what your needs are, what the paperwork is for that area, what the allocations policy is for that area, so that when you're coming closer to the date, 90% of the work to get you on that list is already done.
That's really good advice.
Thanks, Fleur. So we've got somebody that's currently looking to purchase their first home after privately renting for 12 years. A lot of the most suitable properties that come up, bungalows with level access, etc., are retirement properties with an age restriction. Do you know if there's any leeway on this for younger disabled people?
I would say talk to a lawyer, ask about reasonable adjustments, because that might be something that needs further investigation. I've seen it mentioned on social housing, council properties. I've not seen that mentioned on the private sector. So I'd be really excited to know actually how that works out.
I'm just going to move over to the chat now from the questions in the room. So about this one, I'm just scrolling back through. There's lots of things been put in the chat while we've been talking.
That's good.
Okay, so Sam has said that the age limit has really frustrated him. He's tried to argue with his council and got nowhere.
Get somebody good advice. If the council are not doing that and not, if they don't have another plan for younger disabled people, that is a problem. I would collect the evidence, keep the emails of what they've said to you, keep the letters, get a copy of their allocations policy and show that to a lawyer. Mention the reasonable adjustments part of the Equality Act and see if that can be taken forward.
Is this something that it would be something you could contact your MP about? Would that be another avenue to go down?
That is another avenue, yes. It depends which area you're in as to how quickly your MP responds or how they may handle the situation, but absolutely have a word.
So he's also asked that he's been, in regards to means testing, the DFG, Sarah, he's been asked that he has to pay a contribution that he can't afford. Is this an area that the top-up grant can come in, or?
I don't know that, but I think on that, the resource that I put up earlier, the disability rights resource, has comprehensive advice about that sort of thing. I think that would be a good place to go to find out a bit more. I'm sorry I haven't ginned up on every aspect, but yeah, I tried there.
And that'll be going out to you at the end. It will be sent by email following the events. I think it's going out tomorrow midday. Okay, so somebody's mentioned that there's a great presentation today, and that they work for Inclusion London, the Deaf and Disabled People's Organisation.
Woohoo!
Alongside the New Economics Foundation and Disability Rights UK, we're working with a group of disabled people to form a disabled campaigning group around housing. We're currently discussing potential actions we could take. We meet every month or two. Everyone's welcome to join, and there's an email. I can pop
Okay, brilliant. Can you forward that to me, Kath?
I was going to mention I will pop that email into the email that's going to be sent out, if that's okay with Mariella. Just let me know if it's not. But yeah, I'll pop that into the email that's being sent out.
Thank you.
I should probably mention here as well, as part of UpLift, we're just starting now to form a group about campaigning, which people will get to choose about what they'd like to campaign about and how. So there's an option there as well. I might get in touch with you about that, Mariella. So Scott's asking, what's the likelihood of me getting a mortgage with his condition? He lives in Scotland and wants to get a place with my disabled girlfriend who lives in Northern Ireland, but they want to live in Scotland. Is she better off moving over here first? They don't know where to start. I feel like you would know how to start this off, Fleur.
It's something that I don't have personal experience in, but I would say, again, go to the banks, go to the mortgage lenders and talk to them. Each one will have their own overcomplicated, unfathomable system and say to them, look, I have a stable income, I am building a life. What are you going to offer me? How are you going to get my money? Picture yourself as a customer, as a resource, and try and make them see the benefit of giving you a mortgage and adjusting their policies if they are no good. And if you do find some that are dodgy, which I would imagine the number of mortgage lenders out there, one of them maybe, don't keep it quiet. Come back to us, come back to Pathfinders in general, get some legal advice and go forward with that. I've just seen something flash up saying, does being on benefits count as a stable income? That would be up to the mortgage lender. I would be interested to hear what they say.
Me too. Yeah, I think this is again where talking to the community is a good option. Asking your peers, other members of Pathfinders, what are their experiences of getting a mortgage. The more info you could arm yourself with, the better. So yeah, ask people.
So I think there's probably a second part to that question, Fleur, in would it be better for somebody that lives in another country, Northern Ireland, to move to Scotland before they try and start?
I really couldn't say on that, but Northern Ireland is a part of the UK, so I don't see how there would be any difference in terms of legislation.
Thank you. I think we could just say again, talk to people, just ask questions.
Good luck.
And Sam shared a link. Would you like to share this link as well, Sam? Where he helped work on the BBC regarding inaccessible housing. There's a link to a story there. It might be useful for people. I've got another plug from Mariella here. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I'm sorry if I'm not. They produced some policy briefings on accessible housing, and there's one on the Renters Reform Bill and reasonable adaptations, which includes DFGs, coming out soon. They're targeting it at DDPOs.
Brilliant. Deaf and disabled people's organisations.
But
have a look around. That's the other tip. Have a look around, as well as talking to individual disabled people that you know. Try to find where your nearest DDPO is, because it might be in the next town over, but they may still have advice that's relevant to you. There's a map produced by Disability Cornwall of DDPOs, and just Google DDPO and where you are, because they will have information, maybe not on the topic that you're looking at now, but maybe something that you need to know and didn't think to ask. And of course, that's what Pathfinders is as well. So, hooray.
Yes, you can always get in touch with us. And there's usually somebody that can help us. If you're not already a member of the Facebook group or a member of Pathfinders, do become a member, because there's a wealth of knowledge there. included in the email. I know I keep mentioning this, but the one we'll be sending out, there is a link for membership, and I would encourage everybody to join Pathfinders. Anybody can become a member. It just depends on what level, depending on whether you have a neurological condition or you're just a supporter. And you can choose to receive our monthly emailed newsletter. So please do that. And also, if you think you are already a member, it's quite often useful that we have an update. So please apply again. It doesn't take long. It's just a quick Google form, so that we can make sure that we've got all your details up to date and your preferences about how you'd like to be contacted as well. I think we've got just a little bit more time for final questions. We've gone over a little bit. I'm sorry about that. And if not, then I think we're going to finish it soon. So Claire said, thanks it's very clear and informative. Thank you, Sarah and Fleur.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you all.
So shall we round that up here then? Thank you ever so much, Sarah and Fleur. It's been brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. Lots of things to think about, lots of ways that we can start if we're not at a starting point. I think that's what I've learned from this, where to start and where you can go, which can be applied to lots of situations.